Hello. I'm gonna explain the three stages again of what's been happening in the West, as well as what I'm discussing about what's been happening in the West, with three stages. Two of those stages being censorship, and the third stage being uglification. I'm gonna describe them and discuss them. Try not to repeat myself too much, but I'm gonna go through a quick description of what those entail when it comes to the three stages. Two stages being light censorship and heavy censorship, and then the third stage being uglification. Now, predominantly, the West has pretty much gone through all three stages when it comes to Canada, United States, because they're trying to push a woke feminist ideology of accepting transgenderism. So then they're doing everything they can to make female video game characters as generic and neutral as possible, um, so they can push a narrative and really focus on making female characters seem just average looking and gender neutral, so they can push the acceptance of transgenderism and to get people to conform, to accept that transgenderism is a more acceptable thing in the current as a current society norm. And now this is pretty much predominantly in the West, forcing this woke ideology of an acceptance of transgenders, obesity, and individuals that are gay. So they've been really focusing on that. The East has kind of gone through some of the stages, but mostly about the first stage of censorship, which is the light censorship, and somewhat a bit of the heavy censorship as well. The East, such as Japan, hasn't gone to uglification yet, but they are definitely at least the second stage of censorship. Like I said, the West has pretty much gone through both stages of censorship, and have gone to the third stage, which is uglification. And yeah, South Korea, yeah, it's pretty much also gone to at least light censorship, which is the first stage. And this is all basically to push the woke narrative, um, and the woke ideology being thrust upon a lot of individuals to force them to um, comply and conform of that individual being more tolerant and more accepting of transgenderism, gayness, and obesity. And then doing what they can to take that, an individual person's right to simply not being very accepting to it or agreeing with it. And basically, like I said, woke feminist ideology is not really about representation, acceptance, tolerance, diversity, and inclusion. It's about pushing a woke narrative, being pushed by woke feminology, by woke feminists, whether it's male or female feminists, to force people that would disagree with them, and just and have a completely different opinion, of not being willing to be as open minded of acceptance towards these people, to basically completely conform into complete acceptance of woke ideology. And so the first stage that I'm going to describe is very simple. It was nothing really drastic when it came to the changes, but there was definitely clearly changes that were being made to specifically female video game characters. And with the light censorship within this 10 years of woke feminist ideology that's being pushed by woke feminists, it started off with light censorship, and it just got more drastically worse over the years, to about in the middle of the 10 years. It became from being light censorship was just very small changes, minor changes, but changes nonetheless, to more drastic changes. I'm gonna go and describe what those changes are, and I'm gonna start doing that right now. So when I'm talking about light censorship, that stage pretty much includes, like I said, minor changes, but changes nonetheless. And that was reducing the breast size, not drastically, but still reducing the breast size to a smaller size than what that female video game character's original size was, as well as, and altering and changing the body proportions as well. And that was kind of like reducing the proportions and taking away that hourglass figure as much as possible. But even though it wasn't drastic, it was still reducing the body proportions to try and discourage having a female video game character having an hourglass figure, as well as and slightly reducing the breast size. And the major focus though was to try and make sure that there was games that were coming out with uh, as less. Oh my god, sorry, I'm getting tongue twisted. It's sometimes it's difficult for me to kind of like come think of words that I can say to really clearly express myself. So the focus of light censorship, besides what I just described, was to basically try and make games come out, as much games as possible, that have female video game characters, not have jiggle physics. Now, some games still came out with jiggle physics, but the whole focus was to try and get as much games out without jiggle physics, and it's trying to exclude that as much as possible. Besides reducing the breast size and reducing the body proportions and trying to take away that hourglass figure as much as possible. Now, it was, like I said, minor changes to the body proportions and the breast size, slightly reducing the breast size and slightly restricting and reducing the body proportions. As much as what they were able to get away with when it came to the light censorship, and that happened at the beginning of the 10 years of this woke feminist ideology that was being pushed by woke feminists, whether it was a male or female feminist, that was the majority on the left that was embracing this ideology and then forcing it on other people through any source of entertainment, whether it was movies or video games, etc. And so, like I said, it went from light censorship, it got more drastic, and it got to heavy censorship. So it kind of went from light censorship to medium censorship to heavy censorship. But it was really more light censorship that started it off, and then in the middle of the 10 years is when the heavy censorship was really at its peak. And when I say at its peak is that after it got to heavy censorship, there was really nowhere else it can go when it came to altering the proportions of the female video game character's body to restrict that, to discourage it and reduce it, as well as not just the hourglass shape, but the breast size as well. And all this just became more drastic when it came to heavy censorship. The thing though with the heavy censorship at this point was it wasn't just slightly reducing the breast size of specifically female video game characters, as well as just slightly reducing the hourglass figure of female characters when it came to the body proportions. It wasn't just minor or slight changes, it was drastic changes to the overall physique and the curvature of a female video game character's body, as well as breast size. To the point where when it came to heavy censorship, it was not just minor reduction in breast size, but it's just a very drastic reduction in breast size to the point where female video games that were coming out were literally in A cup, B cups, and no greater than that. There was pretty much making sure by the time it got to heavy censorship that there was no female character that had a large bosom and had like noticeable breasts. That when you would look at the character, you would be able to recognize that this female character had breasts because they were so heavily reduced because they were very discouraged to have enlarged breasts. So they were really got down to basically an A cup and a B cup and no greater than those sizes. And then after that, like I said, it was also drastically reducing the body proportion to the point where they didn't really have an hourglass figure whatsoever. And this is all happening to specifically only female video game characters. The male video game characters were not really censored or touched with any light or heavy censorship. They got to keep their their tone, their muscular physique, their chiseled abs, and overall their physical structure when it came to tonus and muscularity. Um, so, yeah. And then, like I said, besides, and just heavily reducing the breast size more drastically, as well as the curvature and hourglass shape of a female video game character, it was also not just adding more fabric with the light censorship, because with the light censorship, like I said, it was not just slightly reducing the breast size with the light censorship and the hourglass figure and the female video game character's proportions. It was also with the light censorship adding more fabric in areas that this a little bit of extra fabric, clothing and cloth would be added to a character was always around the breast, besides slightly reducing the breast size, and these pieces of fabric would always go around the breast to and around the pelvis and around the butt. And this was basically to try and make sure that less skin was being shown and revealed. And it was always then this fabric and piece of clothing, additional clothing, would be always added to cover up cleavage, to cover up side boob and under boob, as well as like certain areas around the pelvis and butt. So it would be around like the inner thighs, the outer thighs, the waist, and the hip. And there was just less skin being shown with the light censorship and more covered up in clothing. Um, Besides, like I said earlier, with the light censorship, and slightly reducing the breast size and the hourglass figure of the female video game character. So this was all happening with the light censorship, and like I said, the heavy censorship, it became just more drastic with those things, with adding more cloth and clothing onto certain areas that the female video game character. The majority of those extra layers of clothing being around the breast, the pelvis, and the butt, to basically cover up more of the skin, to make sure that there was less skin being revealed. And it was always around the cleavage, the under boob, the side boob, and then anywhere around the butt or the pelvis. And that was the light censorship. Now, like I said, the heavy censorship got more drastic, where instead of just adding additional pieces of clothing and cloth, it became, okay, well, we're going to add more clothing and cloth and fabric, specifically from the neck down to the feet, or neck down to the toes. Adding, and just covering up the character completely to make sure that at this point no skin was being revealed when it came to any area that was neck high to neck high and further down, so neck to toe. And this was basically at this point with the heavy censorship completely covered them up in clothing from neck to toe, as well as like I said, everything just got more drastic. Besides with the clothing just covering up from only specifically the female video game character from neck to toe in clothing, because everything else was also very drastically added, and went just very very drastic from light censorship to alterate, making these alterations and changes. It also became, like I said, with the breast size with the heavy censorship, it was literally reducing the breast and reducing the breast size to only A and B cups, and not going anything really beyond that size. As well, like I said, covering the female video game character up to from neck to toe in clothing, to make sure that really no skin was being revealed besides just the skin of the face. And as well, at this point too, drastically removing the hourglass figure and drastically reducing in the proportions of specifically only a female video game character. So by the time I got the heavy censorship, at this point, like, anything that could have been done to make a female video game character's proportions of the body generic and average has been done with the heavy censorship. The light censorship, and you can still tell that it was a female character, because these alterations and changes were not in additional pieces of clothing, cloth, and fabric, were added lightly, and when it came to with clothing, and when it came to the reducing, it was done lightly as well. So the additional pieces of clothing, cloth, and fabric was added lightly, and then, like I said, it was always around the breast to cover up cleavage, side boob, and under boob, and it was only like slightly reduction in specifically only the female body's proportions. So you can definitely tell, like, it was still a female video game character, a fictional female video game character, because everything that was added when it came to clothing fabric and cloth, and then the reduction of proportions, were very minor and not really that drastic, but still changes and alterations none the same. But with the light censorship, and because of that, and you can tell that and this character was still gender specific, and that it was a female character with the light censorship. And this happened at the beginning of the 10 years of this woke ideology that's being pushed. In the middle of the 10 years, like I said, it came to heavy censorship. And with the heavy censorship from light censorship, things just got way more drastic when it came to altering and changing specifically only a female video game character. And pretty much what happened with that was, because everything just got more drastic, everything that I was talking about with the light censorship just went further, was just applied with more intensity to specifically only female video game characters. And like I said, at that point, it wasn't just trying to make as much games come out with no jiggle physics. It was basically, let's make sure that every game that comes out has no jiggle physics. Let's make sure that we can not just slightly reduce the body proportions to give specifically a female video game character not as much as an hourglass shape, but heavily reduce those body proportions to kind of really make sure that these kind of characters didn't have that hourglass shape, as well as heavily reducing the breast size, like I said, to make sure that it wasn't anything beyond a B cup. We were lucky to even get a character with the C cup, but definitely there was never anything female video game character specifically greater than a C cup. So yeah, that was the heavy censorship, and that kind of happened in the middle of the 10 years. And like I said, those were the two stages of censorship: light censorship and heavy censorship. I don't really want to describe medium censorship, because medium censorship is just pretty much like in between what I described for the light censorship and the heavy censorship. And the thing with the light censorship, and like I said, it just pretty much got more drastically worse and more forcefully applied to specifically only female video game characters, more drastically. So whatever was the medium censorship, it just anyways got elevated and more applied, more drastically applied, to the point where it just got the heavy censorship. So it was just a progression, nothing but light censorship just being nothing but a progression of more drastic alterations and changes, and forced censorship to the point where it got heavy censorship. So really, medium censorship was just a procrastination, not a procrastination, of progress from light censorship to heavy censorship, and it was just a systematic, progression. Yeah, it was just pretty much a progression from light censorship to heavy censorship when it came to medium censorship, because it was just progressing from light to heavy. So that's all medium was just a progression from what I described about light censorship to the point where I got to heavy censorship. And I've already pretty much just described the heavy censorship. I've already described the light censorship. And all this pretty much really drastically altered the appearance when it came to the proportions of the body of a female video game character. No, and at this point, nothing was really done to the face when it came to the censorship. It was mostly, let's do what we can with the female, specifically the female video game character's body, and breast size. And like I said, light censorship, the progression just got drastically worse with the censorship to the point where it got the heavy censorship. And it was just pretty much more radical, more drastic alterations and changes to the overall physical physique of specifically a female video game character. And it was mostly focused on, in either adding more fabric and clothing and cloth, to the point where it got to not just adding more clothes. Well, I know it's, like I said, it was progression. I know it's still, in adding cloth, clothing, and fabric, but it was just more drastic as censorship got more intense, to not just covering up with the light censorship only specifically the certain areas of the breasts with clothing, and the pelvis and the butt. But like I said, when it came to light censorship to the heavy censorship, it became okay. Well, now instead of just certain areas of the breast being covered or the pelvis or the butt with additional clothing, cloth, and fabric, now it became with the heavy from the neck down to the feet or the neck to toes, completely cover up specifically the female video game character in clothing, so no skin is being revealed. So the light censorship was making sure that skin around the breast, whether it was side boob, cleavage, or under boob, wasn't being shown, as well as areas around the pelvis and the butt wasn't being shown. It came to having skin being shown. But with the heavy censorship, it became okay. Well, instead of just like those more private areas being more clothed, it's let's just pretty much get specifically only female characters from neck down to toe, neck down to feet, completely covered up in clothing, as well heavily reducing the breast size to be only like a cup and B cup. We were lucky to get a female video game character that had anything more than the B cup, and we were lucky to get a character with the C cup. And like with the light censorship is they want to try and get as much games out as possible with no jiggle physics. With the heavy censorship, it basically became okay. Let's get every single game out that we can with no jiggle physics, as well. Like I said, covering out the female video game character, specifically a female video game character from neck down to toe in clothing, instead of with light censorship only certain areas with additional clothing, cloth, and fabric. So like those were the stages. Like I said, the light censorship was three things: cover up the character in more clothing, cloth, and fabric, but only around the breast, only around the pelvis and the butt, to pretty much make sure that less skin was being revealed, was one thing that happened with the light censorship. The second thing that happened with the light censorship was let's try and get as much games out as possible with no jiggle physics. And then the third thing that happened with the light censorship was the reduction of breast size, as well as the reduction of female body proportions with female video game characters, slightly reducing the hourglass figure. So those were the three things that happened with the light censorship. The heavy censorship, once again, is taking those three things from the light censorship and just making them more amplified and more drastic. And what I mean by more amplified and more drastic was it went from kind of something that was kind of lightly applied to full on just applied to the character at this point with heavy censorship from what I've described from the light censorship. And what the three things were with the heavy censorship was now let's not just cover up certain areas with a bit of fabric, clothing, and cloth. Let's pretty much put a female character, specifically female video game character, from neck down in clothing. Let's not just slightly reduce the breast size, but drastically reduce the breast size to make sure that every female video game character only had like an A cup or a B cup. And like I say, we were lucky to get a character with a C cup when it came to cup size. And then as well, just drastically reducing the body proportions to the point where there was no real an hourglass proportions with the female video game character. So, and those were the three things. Well, I mentioned two of those, but then the third, no, I did mention that. The third thing was, okay, like I think I'm pretty sure I did mention that, was to get every single video game out with no jiggle physics. So, yeah, light censorship, three things. Get games out with as much as possible with no jiggle physics. Yeah, try and get as much games out as possible with no jiggle physics. Slightly reduce the breast size, and add more fabric, clothing, and cloth around certain areas, such as the breast, the pelvis, and the butt, to make sure that less cleavage, side boob and under boob was being exposed in areas around, like I said, the butt and the pelvis, such as the inner thighs, the outer thighs, the hips, and the waist, and covering them up with more clothing to make sure that those parts of to make sure that less skin was being revealed. Was the one thing when it came to light censorship. The second thing, like I said, was let's try and get as much games out as possible with no jiggle physics was the second thing. And then the third thing was with the light censorship, reduce, like I said, the breast size and the hourglass figure. on the female body proportions was the third thing with the light censorship. And like I said, the heavy censorship was those three things that was just more amplified and more drastically applied to specifically female video game characters with the heavy censorship. And like I said, first thing was now instead of making sure that only some games came out with no jiggle physics, it was make sure that every game comes out with no jiggle physics. Let's not just cover up certain areas of the breast, and the pelvis and the butt with more additional clothing, fabric, and cloth, but cover up the female video game character from neck down to clothing, so no skin is being revealed. And then, and then the third thing with the heavy censorship was just a more drastic thing of, completely reducing the breast size to only an A cup and a B cup, no greater than that really, and then completely drastically, reducing the body proportions and of the hourglass figure, and then there became the uglification after that, and that kind of happened within the more recent years. And the uglification, because there was so much done to make the body of a female video game character very generic and average, and to make them as gender neutral as possible. So people from the woke ideology can push acceptance of transgenderism. Was basically, okay, well, we've done all this stuff to the body, and let's use uglification with the face and the personality. And at this point, it was, to take away any feminine personality of the female video game character to give that character a more masculine personality, as well as because all this stuff of light censorship and heavy censorship was already done to the body. What they decided to do from that point is focus on the face and kind of defeminize the face and make the face more masculine. And how they did that was they essentially reduced the wideness of the eyes. They made the face more angular. They made the skin complexion more rough and rigid. They reduced the softness and the puffiness of the cheeks and the softness of the face. And just gave the more masculine face, being that the face was more angular, the eyes were more narrow, the cheeks were more flat instead of puffy, the skin complexion was more rigid and tough and kind of worn. So it was really doing that with the face, and then after, like I said, just giving them a more domineering, more masculine personality. And at this point, it was pretty much complete, in the censorship and everything that they can do to make a female video game character very generic, very average, with no femininity in the personality, the face, or the body was done at this point. And that's the kind of female character that we kind of get when it comes to Canada, United States, and the West. We get, in a very generic, average, looking female character that honestly you can't even tell if it's a female character because it just looks almost like a gender neutral character that really doesn't have a lot of distinguishing features of femininity or of a female video game character. And you really can't tell that unless if this character is in the cutscene for, X amount of time to really have to look at the character long enough to distinguish that as a female video game character, because you can't tell this just from looking at the character very briefly. So yeah, that's unfortunately, what happened with the light censorship, the heavy censorship, and uglification. Now the West has pretty much already gone through those three stages, and the East isn't that far behind. You can definitely say Japan has kind of had some characters lightly censored, and then then they've also had characters heavily censored. Now the characters that they've had lightly censored when it comes to the East, such as Japan, is Tifa Lockhart. And like I said, with the light censorship, and it's not completely covering up the character from neck to toe in clothing. It's, and just adding more fabric, clothing, and cloth around certain parts of the female video game character. And that's basically, and making sure that no cleavage is being shown, no side boob or under boobs being shown, and just making sure that none of that skin's being shown by adding more fabric and cloth in around those areas of the breast, as well as more cloth, fabric, and clothing around the pelvis and the butt. There's Tiva Lockhart is a good example of the East Japan kind of applying light censorship to one of their characters, well-known characters, and I could definitely say the heavy censorship has been applied to characters like Ada Wong. Now, like I said, with the heavy censorship, is covering up the character from neck to toe in clothing, but it's not just also that; it's also completely it's completely altering the costume or completely exchanging the costume for something else that's covering that female video game character from neck to toe in clothing. And unfortunately, Ada Wong has actually had a complete alteration and change to one of her classic outfits, such as in the Resident Evil 4 remake. And she no longer has her classic outfit as an optional choice, and she has an entirely whole new outfit that covers her from neck to toe, which with the previous outfit that she wore that was the original actually was showing more skin. So that was a good example of in the heavy censorship that I was describing that's been applied to Ada Wong, which is a character that was created years ago in the East, such as Japan. And then another character that was created years ago from Japan, the East, was Tifa Lockhart. And she hasn't experienced the heavy censorship like Ada Wong, but she has experienced the light censorship. And I've described what light censorship and heavy censorship is and the difference. And like I said, light censorship is just a more drastic application of censorship that has been eventually progressed to heavy censorship. And I described what light censorship is with the three things that kind of make up what light censorship is. So, and like I said, so the East Japan has pretty much already gotten to cases and good examples of characters that have been lightly censored and heavily censored. Now, they haven't got to uglification like the West has, because these are still characters that you can see still have like somewhat of a feminine face, more so than the body. But definitely you can still see indications predominantly with the face that is still a female character. So they're not at uglification when it comes to these, such as Japan with uglification, but they've actually do have characters that they've lightly censored and heavily censored, even though they haven't uglified their characters yet. And then, like I said, the West, Canada, United States have pretty much gone through the three stages: light censorship, heavy censorship, and uglification. I've already explained what light censorship is, and that heavy censorship is just a more drastic version of light censorship. And also the West, besides having those two forms of censorship, they've also got to uglification, and I've described what uglification is. Now, South Korea, they pretty much have not really gotten to the point of uglification, and definitely not heavy censorship, but they have gotten to light censorship so far. And I'm going to go through the distinction of what those things are. Once again, light censorship implies three things. The first thing out of the light censorship is trying to make sure that there's games that come out, as much games as possible with no jiggle physics, as well as reducing the body proportions to not have an hourglass figure, and kind of restricting that and reducing that, not drastically but slightly, as well as slightly reducing the breast size, not drastically but slightly reducing the breast size, as well as covering them up in more fabric, clothing, and cloth, and not from neck to toe, but with in areas around the breast, the pelvis, and the butt, to make sure that there's not as much skin being shown, so that way no cleavage is being shown, side boob or under boob is being shown, or in just general areas around the butt and the pelvis, to make sure any of that kind of skin isn't being shown. And those are the three things with the light censorship. And like I said, heavy censorship is just a more drastic version of censorship, of light censorship, to heavy censorship. And once again, instead of just uncovering up the character here with the more fabric, additional fabric, clothing, and cloth around the breast to make sure, around the pelvis and the butt, to make sure that cleavage and side boob and under boob isn't being shown, as well as certain sensitive areas around the butt and the pelvis isn't being shown, to cover up more skin so the skin isn't being shown. With the heavy censorship is, okay, let's go from neck to toe this time instead of just certain areas in clothing, where now it's completely cover up the female video game character in clothing instead of just certain parts of her body. As well as not just slightly reducing the breast size, but drastically reducing the breast size, so they only have A cups and B cups. as well as at this point with the heavy censorship, let's make sure that every game that comes out, instead of only a few games coming out that don't have jiggle physics, let's try and make sure that every game comes out with the heavy censorship, that every female character doesn't have jiggle physics. So that was kind of the light censorship to the heavy censorship. And like I said, keep in mind, this is being all pushed by woke feminist ideology, that's being pushed by woke feminists that are predominantly, Democrats and on the left that pretty much are pushing this. And yeah, so, and like I said, then it went to delegation. I already specified what that is. But the West has gone through the 3 stages, and within each stage has about 3 steps. And then the East has gone through kind of the first stage with some characters, and then some other characters in the East, such as Japan, has gone through to the second stage of censorship. And once again, like there's light censorship, the heavy censorship also has 3 steps. And basically, those 3 steps are just more drastic versions of the light censorship that has 3 steps that I described. So, like I said, he's pretty much gone to the heavy censorship with some of their characters, light censorship with some of their characters, when it comes to the East and specifically Japan. And like I said, light censorship has 3 steps, and then that's just got more drastic to heavy censorship that also have those 3 steps, but just a more drastic version of the light censorship of those 3 things within light censorship. But they haven't gone to uglification yet, and I'm not surprised if they'll ever go there, because I think they will, since they seem to be fully embracing this woke ideology. And then South Korea, well, they were the one country I was really hoping would not bend the knee to light censorship, heavy censorship, and uglification, and that they were actually going to allow fan service and sex appeal in their games without any kind of form of censorship. Whether it was light censorship or heavy censorship, I was really hoping South Korea would be that country to really stick it to the woke agenda. And these folk feminists that are trying to use female characters that are very gender neutral and very generic and average looking to push a woke narrative. And I really thought South Korea was going to have, in the backbone to not bend the knee and to allow their characters to be something that woke feminists that wants to push woke ideology can use to push a narrative. Unfortunately, I was wrong about South Korea, even though they haven't really fully embraced woke ideology. You can definitely tell that they wouldn't really not that they wouldn't hesitate, but they're not as resistant to woke ideology as what I was led to believe and what I actually wanted to believe and what I hoped I wanted to believe about that country. I was wrong about that country. It seems like they're not as resistant to it as what I wanted to believe they were, and unfortunately, it seems like they even have shown cases of censorship when it comes to light censorship with some of their games and some of their female video game characters, specifically Eve from Stellar Blade. Now, I know people are going to say, well, it's only a few costumes that have been censored, and even then, the final product is the product that the director from Stellar Blade has intended it to be and wanted it to be, and released it with that intention in mind of how he wanted the game to be. Now, either way, even if this is the final product is the one that the director from Shift Up, when it comes to Stellar Blade, was the one that he intended the final product to be. The fact is, it doesn't change that the update was literally 1 day before release, which didn't really give anybody any time to really know what was happening and to be taken by surprise by this new edition and this new version of the video game. I think and you can almost argue that it wasn't misleading and false advertisement or false marketing, because so far it seems like the director, the final product with the patch and the update, is the final product that the director intended the game to have and the way for the game to be. But it really doesn't change the fact, and this was information that nobody knew about and wasn't given an appropriate amount of time to know that these were going to be changes that were coming to the game. And it's almost in a way false advertisement, because the entire time before the one day before the game was released, for before that one day before the game was going to be released, all the prior to that, that entire month of April, everybody was led to believe that there would be no censorship, and that Eve was going to come, to be a very attractive character with fan service and sex appeal, and there was no indication of adding more material, more cloth to cover up certain areas of Eve's body when this is a game that's rated mature. The thing too was very peculiar. Is, like I said, in a way, it is kind of light censorship, regardless of this final product and that came with the final update. It's the final product that the director wanted it to be, and what his what, how can I say this? Well, basically what he wanted anyways, because either way, if you look at other videos besides this one, I've kind of made a couple of videos myself. I feel like there was still censorship, because it's just peculiar how, like, the alteration and changes in Eve's outfit was always, like I said, around the cleavage. It was nowhere else. Every piece of cloth, fabric, and clothing that was additional from the original outfit was around the breast and the cleavage, covering up the cleavage, like I said, with the light censorship. So obviously, even though apparently from the director saying that this is the final product and this is the final product that he intended the game to be, even with the changes to a couple of Eve's outfits, it's just very peculiar that all this extra, the little pieces of extra fabric, clothing, and cloth that was added was all for each costume specifically added to be around the cleavage. And like I said, that's pretty much an indication and a form of light censorship. So, that's why I still take it as, regardless if, and it was the final product that the developer wanted, meaning including what the update was and the patch was, and that whatever the patch was the final product that, and the director envisioned and had in mind. I still consider it light censorship, because of pretty much every time that Eve's costume was altered, it was always additional cloth, clothing, and fabric around the one particular area of Eve's outfit every single time. And it was always where I mentioned about the light censorship, around the cleavage, around the breast, to pretty much make sure that no cleavage, under boob or side boob, was being exposed. And then that no skin around those areas was being shown or exposed, covering them up in as much clothing as possible. So I'm gonna say that, yeah, it was light censorship. The director of Shift Up, when it came to the game of Stellar Blade, might not see it as censorship, because the final product with the update was the product that he envisioned, and that this director had in mind when the game was released. And but like I said, I still consider it light censorship, because it was specifically these pieces of clothing, cloth, and fabric were not added to any other part of Eve except for specifically every single time around the cleavage. And like I said, to me, that's literally a form of censorship, because there are some people in the world that are easily offended about, a female character having cleavage, because obviously, there are women out there that don't have large breasts and don't have the capability of showing cleavage. And I think basically it is censorship, because obviously the studio Shift Up, or even Sony, didn't want to offend any female didn't want to offend any female gamers that possibly didn't have large breasts and were not capable of showing cleavage, because they didn't have the breasts or the cup size to be able to do that. I'm thinking they just didn't want to offend female gamers, so they decided to censor Eve from Stellar Blade, so that way, there was no female gamers or females in general that would be offended by Eve. Yeah, so I think that's what it was about, and it was censorship, even though, like I said, the director of Shift Up, when it comes to the game of Stellar Blade, isn't probably going to consider it censorship, because to him, he's probably going to consider it, like I think he even said that to him, that's the final product. It's the final product he intended the game to be, the way he imagined the game to be and envisioned the game to be. Um, but like I said, I still really consider it like censorship, because every time Eve's outfit and costumes got reimagined, redesigned, and altered, it was always fabric, cloth, and clothing added in one particular area, and that area was always the cleavage, and making sure that there was no cleavage being exposed, or any skin of the cleavage being shown. And I think, like I said, it's because like the graffiti that they censored because they were afraid that they were gonna offend African Americans, black people. They also probably were concerned of offending, you know, females and female gamers that possibly didn't have in a large rack and were or large breasts that were incapable of showing cleavage because they didn't have large breasts or like a voluptuous rack or anything large enough to give them the possibility of being able to have cleavage. And I think like these people want to call gamers like myself incels. What was it? Fuck, goomers or whatever that word is, which I don't know like how to pronounce it. But I did look it up today, and it's pretty much somebody that's like a excessive masturbator and gets off on things that causes them to be like a excessive masturbators. Uh, and I think that's kind of stupid. And personally, myself, it's because and if you're somebody that doesn't care about masturbation, then there's nothing wrong with you having that preference. That is something that's not your particular thing. But to insult somebody else that has a different sexual drive than you, and basically insult them because they have more higher more higher sex drive than that other person, that doesn't have a problem with having in sexual content in whatever it is, social media, whether it's a video game, movie, etc., and so on. I think it's kind of foolish and absolutely, retarded for that person to call somebody a gloomer, whatever that word is. I'm gonna have to look it up so I get at some point get the pronunciation right of that word. To insult them. I think it's just normal for people to have different sex drives. Unfortunately, and it's not even unfortunately, just in general, people have a much higher sex drive than others, and if you're somebody that has a much higher sex drive than others, personally, I think there's nothing wrong with that. And if it makes somebody freaking masturbate more often than somebody else because they don't have the same sex drive, like I don't think that there's nothing wrong with the person, and being themselves, and being true to who they are. And I don't think it's fair to really insult somebody just because and they have a different sex drive or they have a different preference than somebody else that's contradictory to one another. So I think that's pretty much because and they don't really have a good argument half the time. So like I said, when they can't get something censored, when they can't get something excluded, they go to censorship. If they can't get something censored, they go to insults. When they can't silence, so like, and this is what I've noticed all the time when it comes to like left wing ideology, and woke feminists pushing woke ideology that are predominantly Democrats and on the left wing that are especially like extreme left wingist. And when they can't get something excluded, they try and get it censored. If they can't get something censored, they try to get it silenced. If they can't get it silenced, they trying to get somebody canceled. If they can't get somebody canceled, what's the next thing that they turn to is insults. And I think pretty much it's just they go to insults because they have nothing else to fall back on. Obviously, and excluding whatever it was they were trying to exclude didn't work. To censor what it was, that they were trying to censor didn't work. To get somebody silenced, it didn't work. To get somebody canceled, it didn't work. And the only thing they have left is to turn in to use insults, because they honestly don't have any common sense and logical discretion, or they don't have any discretion, and they don't have any common sense and any logical thinking with anything that really back up their opinion and their perspective. And because they have nothing to really back up their opinion or their perspective, because anything that they do bring can kind of be how can I say this, can be challenged and easily how can I say this? Easily proven wrong. I don't want to say wrong or right, because at the end of the day, it's pretty much about perspective, and perspective can be seen either way, of either being right or wrong. And I think because they don't really have any solid, they don't have a solid opinion that can be supported by anything factual. Yeah, because they don't have any solid perspectives or opinions that can't be held up by anything factual to cement their opinion and their perspective, to give it substance and to have it hold ground, because there's nothing really supporting it with facts and anything else or common sense. Because they don't have anything kind of giving it that perspective and opinion value, because they don't have anything to give it substance, structure, or value, or a foundation, and they turn, like I said, to excluding something. They turn to censoring. They turn to, what was the other things I was saying? Oh, fuck. Yeah, they turn to silencing. Yeah, so they turn to exclusion. They turn, when that doesn't work, they go to censoring. If that doesn't work, they go to silencing. When that doesn't work, they go to canceling. When that doesn't work, they go to insults. Because, like I said, whatever perspective or opinion that they have can easily crumble, because it's nothing. There's no facts. There's no evidence. There's no common sense. There's no substance or proof or anything to give it a foundation, to keep it, to hold it up with any kind of integrity or firmness or any of that stuff, really, because it's so easily for it to kind of crumble and cripple as soon as you can show something that's contrary to that perspective and opinion, that can easily challenge that opinion and perspective, and it can easily challenge it. They turn to these things, and I think that's what happens a lot of the times. Then really why they go to insults, because they really have nothing else at this point to really fall back on. And they go to the point where they're calling male gamers such as myself that I want sex appeal and fan service. And what I mean by sex appeal and fan service, for fictional video game characters, whether if it's a female video game character or a male video game character, should have sex appeal and fan service, meaning that they should be, especially when it's a rated M game, and this rated M game should have not just gore and violence, but should have a good amount of skin being shown and exposed when you're gonna rate a game a rated M. And then when it comes to sex appeal and fan service, that should be in a game that's rated M, and that means any male character or any female video game character should be exposing a good amount of skin. And unfortunately, Stellar Blade, for your rating that you have, you're not showing in your game to really be a rated M game. There's nothing about your game that really gives that. Well, doesn't even really give. There's nothing about your game that really serves to be rated M. Honestly, because there's really no intense for blood or gore. You have costumes that are slightly revealing, but it doesn't really give you a whole bunch of practical nudity or full nudity. So, and with not really having any blood or gore, and all you really have is in violence, really your game shouldn't be, Stellar Blades shouldn't be given their a rating of rated M. Honestly, like that game should be rated in teen, rated T for teen. Because like the things that I know you expect to come from a rated M game is in full nudity, partial nudity, and immense intense violence, and intense blood and gore. And in Stellar Blade, when it comes to the company Shift Up that developed Stellar Blade, really doesn't have any of that stuff. The only thing it really has is violence, but any game that has violence can easily be rated T for teen. Like, and then you have other games that are rated M that actually have and that should have this kind of content in it for the rating that these games have. For example, in The Last of Us 2, Baldur's Gate 3, Cyberpunk 2077. And they're rated M, but they deserve to be rated M because and it has full nudity, partial nudity, suggestive themes, and intense violence and blood and gore. So like for in Baldur's Gate 3, for Cyberpunk 2077, for The Last of Us 2, like these are games that definitely deserve to get the rated M for mature because these are games that actually have those sorts of content in the game. Stellar Blade, you don't have this kind of content in your game. The only thing you really have right now is some slightly revealing costumes and violence, and that's it. And for only having a few kind of slightly revealing outfits and violence, you really is a game that shouldn't be really rated M. And I think that's what kind of misled people a lot too, is because when they heard that this game wasn't going to be censored, and they also heard that the game was going to be rated M for mature, with the game being rated M for mature and been told the entire month before the game was about to be released that it was also not going to be censored, anybody with two cells that they can rub together in common sense would have come to the conclusion that if you're going to give a game a rated M for mature, as well as constantly kind of like giving the impression that your game was never going to be censored at all and released worldwide with no censorship, anybody with common sense could have easily come to the conclusion, putting those two things together, that they should have anticipated and expected Stellar Blade from Shift Up to have either full nudity, partial nudity, intense violence, suggestive themes, and blood and gore. And we really didn't get a whole bunch of that whatsoever. So I honestly understand why people feel that they were misled and it was false advertising. Despite the director saying that the final version and the final product that we got on release date was the one that he attended and the one that he envisioned. I think really that was very misleading. I think even though that might be the version and the final version, when it comes to on the day the game was released with the updates and with the patch, was the intended version and the one that the director imagined and envisioned, it doesn't change the fact that there was still censorship, particularly because it's kind of peculiar how like the pieces of cloth and fabric and clothing were added into and only specifically the one area of the character of Eve when it came to her outfits, which was once again light censorship that I described, was every single time it was on a cleavage, and covering up the cleavage and making sure that there was no cleavage that was being shown or exposed. So to me, regardless if the director doesn't think it's censorship, I understand why everybody else feels and believes it's censorship. And for the kind of content that Stellar Blade has, that was developed by Shift Up, for all the content that usually comes with a rated M game, there's a lot of content that should go with the game that Stellar Blade doesn't have, that's lacking for that content that I described. Such as full nudity, suggestive themes, partial nudity, intense violence, and blood and gore. Stellar Blade from Shift Up doesn't really have a whole bunch of that. All it has is really violence and some costumes that are revealing. And because of that reason, it definitely didn't deserve to have the rated M for mature. And I think with the rated M for mature, and like I said, a game saying that they were going to be releasing it worldwide with no censorship, It was very misleading, regardless if the director is saying that like there was no censorship because the product that was released on release day was the one that he imagined, the one that he intended, um, is still censorship. And the director can say it's not because it's the final version that he imagined. But for your game to be rated M and not have a lot of that content that comes with a rated M game, as well as saying for an entire month or longer that your game was going to be released with no worldwide with no censorship, um, yeah, it was a very slimy, disgusting, two-faced thing to do. You literally made customers believe they were getting one product from you when you turn around and gave them a whole different other product that you intended and that you wanted to give customers. And you didn't make any of the customers aware of these changes that you wanted and that you were intending to put in the game on release date. And you didn't make sure that, and customers had enough time to know that these were the changes that they were supposed to expect coming. You didn't give the customers enough time whatsoever. This is kind of content that like was going to be altered and changed that should have been made aware to consumers and customers a long time ago, not one day before the game was going to be released. I think that was really the underhanded, slimy, and two-faced thing to do. And I think on those grounds alone, it is pretty much very close to being false advertisement. Even though the director's saying that there was the final version was the version that he imagined and intended to be released on release date, the fact that the director or nobody from Sony gave customers, consumers enough time to know that these were the kind of changes that were going to be applied to Stellar Blade on release date, and only really pretty much making them aware through media, through Twitter and YouTube on the day the game was released, and not making anybody aware of the update until like literally one day before the game was going to be released. It's definitely not enough time to make consumers and customers aware about what you're going to tend to alter and change with your game. And to me, that alone is grounds for false advertisement. So either fix what you've done, shift up, fix what you've done, Sony, or I think somebody has like legal terms to literally bring you to court. And if you don't fix things or alter things and change it back to Free Stellar Blade, hashtag Free Stellar Blade, I think, and there's a good reason for if anybody ever tried to bring you to court, which honestly, if you don't free Stellar Blade, if you don't free Stellar Blade, hashtag Free Stellar Blade, I think there's enough grounds to literally have a lawsuit against either Sony or at least Shift Up for false advertisement. All right, have a good day and take care, everyone. I would like it if you subscribe to my channel. If you don't want to, perfectly fine. And you're always welcome to leave a comment. And you're always welcome to leave a comment. If you can, I'm not gonna try and censor free speech. Yeah, free speech. Express what you want to express. Say what you want to say. But if you don't mind, it's completely up to you. Please be polite or at least respectful. All right. I hope everybody has a wonderful day and a bright future for ahead of everybody. And take care. And I hope everybody does well in the current present time and the near future. Thanks, and I appreciate for anybody who watched this. Have a wonderful day.